We'll start with Cleveland. Cleveland are 11-5. We've spoken about the Browns quite a lot on the pod this year, so probably won't spend too long on them. We already touched on the main storyline, of course, being Joe Flacco, who has come out of the clear blue sky to play like Joe Montana. The first half of the Jets game on Thursday night, he played unbelievably. He had almost 300 yards passing in the first half as the Browns won a cracking DFI bowl against the New York Jets, who are another, probably the third most downtrodden team in the league. Now, the only thing I wanted to say on the Browns, well, two things I'll say, actually. The Joe Flacco thing, we spoke about it a couple of weeks ago and had a good laugh about, could you imagine if Joe Flacco comes back and unseats Deshaun Watson as the starter? Because it's the Browns on Sunday, I was watching the pregame on CBS, and the insider, Jonathan Jones, said, expect the Browns to be all in on Deshaun Watson in 2024, so Joe Flacco won't come back as the week one starter. I thought, of course not. Of course, when something's working and you're a downtrodden team, why would we continue to even try and go with that? We'll just go back to the guy who we're paying all the money to who stinks. I thought that kind of sums up where they're at. So he's apparently not going to retire, so he's going to go somewhere else. Good for Jersey Joe, sticking in there. The second thing I wanted to say in terms of appreciating what the Browns have done, the injury bug has bitten this team pretty hard this year. Obviously, Nick Chubb out for the season, best player on offense, tough. Both starting tackles done for the season, both on IR. The third tackle also on IR. And of course, Deshaun Watson, whatever you make of him, that may have actually been a boon to this team, but he's your QB1 out for the season too. So on paper, you've gone QB1, RB1, LT1, RT1, all on IR, and you are 11-5 and heading for the postseason. So good for the Browns, and those are the kind of two things I wanted to mention. Any thoughts on kind of where the Browns are at, where they're looking going forward?
Yeah, my take on the Browns, Luke, is they did what they needed to do against the teams, that they should probably have beaten largely. Yep. They beat your Tennessee Titans, and they are not a member of the DFI, but
and that was with Deshaun Watson
in Nashville.
So can you imagine how bad we were?
Oof. But I would note that they were the only team in the NFL to face 5 or more DFI teams and go undefeated in those games.
You got to start, Tim.
The only team on the DFI to do that. Yes.
Yeah, you got to start by punching sideways, right? You can't punch down yet because you're not good enough. So you have to punch sideways and up. So good. But
yeah, to take advantage of all of your DFI games, right? They beat the Colts, they beat the Cardinals, they beat the Jaguars, they beat the Texans, and they beat the Jets. Like, to take advantage of all your DFI games, that's half their wins, darn near. Coming against futilely terrible franchises for a long time. Now, the Jags were good this year. The Texans were pretty good this year, though they did get them without C.J. Stroud. The Colts were okay this year. The Cardinals were, and the Jets were disasters, dumpster fires in their own light. But winning games you ought to win is a big feature, especially for mediocre teams, of being able to make the playoffs. I mean, you look, my Pittsburgh Steelers are the definition of a mediocre team this year, right? They are atrocious when they don't play well. They can squeak in a win when they play particularly well or motivated or whatever the case may be. And we lose to the Cardinals and you lose to the Patriots, and all of a sudden you're praying for unlikely playoff scenarios. Whereas if we win those 2 games, all of a sudden, we're the Browns and we're looking at a 4-seed, 5-seed, or sorry, 5-seed, 6-seed situation. Right. And that's the difference. And so credit to the Browns for winning with, a tough injury-plagued season against those teams that you ought to beat, which is easier said than done. So that was my first thing. And then, they snuck in there and won a couple that maybe they shouldn't have won. Beating Baltimore is the one that jumps off the paper, right? You go, I'm sorry. And that was during Baltimore's little, I don't know what I am stretch.
Yeah, it's a divisional game. You know each other well. All those cliches and truisms are
scored a bunch of points against a tough defense. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because the defense is really what's carried the Browns this year. I mean, they are 100%. Leading the league in allowing the fewest yards. It's a convoluted way of saying that, but I hope you get my meaning. They're only allowing 266 yards per game. They're only allowing 165 passing yards per game, which is ridiculous.
Insane. This is 2023.
Yeah. 20 points per game, 20.7 points per game as well, which is not, thrilling, but is pretty damn good. If you're around the 20 mark, that's very good. That's usually top 5, top 10 in the league. I think the bottom, I think it's Baltimore, I think it's 16, which is crazy good. But, anything around 20 is usually decent. My favorite statistic around the Browns, though, that I found is they've got 27 takeaways this year. 27.
It's a couple.
Right? Mm-hmm. They have a -8 turnover differential.
Yeah. What?
Yep.
Is that a real number?
Yeah. So the Browns are 11-5. The 27 takeaways, which is among tops in the league, but they are -8 in turnovers. They've turned it over 35 times, and they're 11-5. So the defense very much carrying the
creating almost 2 turnovers a game and still losing the turnover battle by a half a turnover a game. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I did not know that. That's a wild stat.
So the defense certainly doing the job for the Browns.